Our top focus in WION right now. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Poland on the first leg of his two-nation visit. He was welcomed with special warmth and exuberance by the Indian community in Warsaw. In his address, he thanked the Indian community for their warm welcome and highlighted that this was the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister in the past 45 years.
45 साल बाद भारत का कोई प्रधानमंत्री पोलैंड आया है। बहुत सारे अच्छे काम मेरे नसीब में ही है। कुछ महीने ही पहले मैं ऑस्ट्रिया गया था। वहां भी 4 दशक बाद भारत का कोई प्रधानमंत्री वहां पहुंचा था।
Modi also spoke about the contribution made by the Indian diaspora in strengthening bilateral ties between both the countries and commended their role in the success of Operation Ganga, when thousands of Indian medical students stranded in Ukraine in the wake of the war were evacuated. This is not an era of war, asserted Prime Minister Modi while addressing the Indian community in Poland. Take a listen.
बुद्ध की बात आती है तो जो युद्ध नहीं शांति पर विश्वास करती है। और इसलिए भारत इस रीजन में भी स्थायी शांति का एक बड़ा पैरोकार है। भारत का मत एकदम साफ है। ये युद्ध का युग नहीं है।
Prime Minister Modi will be meeting his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk and President Andrzej Duda later today. After his official engagements in Warsaw, Prime Minister Modi will undertake a 10-hour overnight train journey on the Polish-Ukrainian border to Kyiv. He will have a bilateral meeting with Zelensky during his 8-hour stay in Kyiv, and he will also interact with the Indian community there before returning to Poland in the same train. And for more on this, our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, is joining us live from Kyiv. Hi, Siddhant. This is a first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine. He will be taking a 10-hour journey later today. You're joining us live from Kyiv. What is the mood like in Ukraine ahead of Prime Minister Modi's visit?
Well, essentially, we know that the Indian Prime Minister will be traveling here in Kyiv. It's almost 6 a.m. In Kyiv and people are going for a jog. But essentially, when it comes to meeting with the policymakers, we met with many MPs. They're quite upbeat about the Indian Prime Minister's visit. Essentially, we know that this is the first visit of the Indian Prime Minister, any Indian Prime Minister, since the independence of the country and, of course, since the war as well. And they are hopeful that his presence here in Kyiv will be a strong show of support to President Zelensky. In fact, later today, many MPs plan to meet together and talk about India's role when it comes to the ongoing war. In fact, just yesterday, addressing the diaspora, the Indian Prime Minister set the stage, saying that this is not an era of war. India wants peace in the region and emphasized on dialogue and diplomacy, something that India has been saying since day one when the war broke out. In fact, 2 months ago, the Indian Prime Minister was in Moscow, where he talked about the fact that this is not an era of war and essentially a solution cannot come on the battlefield. And this is the mantra of New Delhi that will be talked about here in Kyiv as well. But the pictures of both the leaders meeting here in Kyiv, this is the third meeting between the two leaders since the war broke out, will be splashed across the world. And of course, this is something that will be closely watched not only in the Western capitals but also in Moscow as to how India can play a role in terms of resolution of the war, but also how India can support Kyiv in terms of humanitarian support and also in terms of reconstruction efforts for the country.
Right, Siddhant, I was just coming to that ahead of the visit, Prime Minister Modi in Warsaw just yesterday made this statement. He said that this is not an era of war. Talk to us more as to how this visit highlights India's growing commitment in strengthening ties with Ukraine and also finding a peaceful resolution in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war.
Well, ahead of the visit, we saw the MEA holding its presser and clearly stating that when it comes to relationship with Ukraine or any other country, which of course means Russia, stands on their own merit and on their own standing. Now, India has been a close partner of Russia. There has been a historical legacy in terms of defense, in terms of energy, which has been getting growing importance since the war broke out. But while India has reaffirmed time and again its relationship with Russia, India has been reaching out to Ukraine as well. The Indian Prime Minister, before the visit to Kyiv, has met the Ukrainian President Zelensky twice. The Russian President, of course, twice as well. First in Samarkand, then of course in Moscow itself just 2 months ago. And when it comes to meeting with President Zelensky, one meeting happened just 2 months ago at the G7 summit in Italy, and where the Indian Prime Minister talked about whatever help required from India, India is willing to provide in terms of coming out with a solution. So largely India's role as the 5th largest economy, the most populated country, and a country which has a growing aspiration on the international stage, is now playing on the international stage, especially when it comes to the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Kyiv. In fact, one important fact which our viewers must know is that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the 3rd Asian leader to travel to Kyiv since the war broke out, after the Japanese Prime Minister and the Indonesian President. And his presence here will surely be something that is being taken and will be taken very positively by the Ukrainian side.
Right, Siddhant, the historic visit by Prime Minister Modi. Indeed, I want to take my last question, that apart from the geopolitics and the message of peace that Prime Minister Modi is coming out with, talk to us more as to how this visit also highlights bilateral and multilateral cooperation between India and Ukraine.
Well, in terms of bilateral cooperation, we know that when it comes to this relationship, there have been high-level engagements, not only at the leaders' level, both of the leaders meeting with each other on the sidelines of the G7 summits, but also in terms of official visits. We saw the Ukrainian Foreign Minister visiting Delhi earlier this year. We have seen the Indian External Affairs Minister having his meetings with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister. There have been official visits in terms of the Deputy Foreign Minister, the Cultural Minister. In fact, the Culture Minister spoke to WION just few weeks ago, and the bilateral component surely will increase as the relationship becomes much more substantive. Remember, before the war broke out, there were 20,000 Indian students in the country, and something that the Ukrainian side was very proud of. And we spoke to some students who are still here in Ukraine, who have come back to complete their studies. They are, of course, scared about the situation. In fact, you hear the air alarm almost on a daily basis every morning. So far, we haven't heard any air alarm here this morning. But essentially, despite the fear, the students are coming back. And this is something that the Indian side will be going to talk about in terms of the completion of these studies, because the studies were impacted for many Indian students after the war broke out, and many of them lost their 1 year and 2 year. And the Indian side has been talking about the Ukrainian side as to how a waiver could be given. So many things are on the anvil, on the table. And during this visit, even if it's a brief visit, 5 to 6 hours, the focus will be on how to increase the bilateral component of the relationship, including cultural. And remember, several MOUs are expected to be signed also during the visit. Nobody knows what kind of MOUs, but there will be some announcement on signing of pacts as well.
Right, Siddharth, we'll of course be tracking Prime Minister Modi's historic visit to Ukraine with you very closely. But thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights.